Hello everyone, I'm Professor Plink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Before we get into today's video, a special shout out to my most recent super thankers, LHRPG Official, Avid Professor Plink Enjoyer, a name that I was very flattered to see, James Lamica, Nightwing 4, Piao Octonawa, Design Tech DK, and David of Oakland 2363. Thank you all very much for your kind support of my channel. You are the secular salami, pragmatic prosciutto, and godless gabagool on my heretical hoagie. Thank you very much for helping me to continue to do what I do. And if you like what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. And of course, like the video, maybe pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm. All glory and honor is yours, almighty algorithmo, and keeping my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video. Today we're going to be tackling one of the heaviest hitters of Christian apologetics, the theologian from which so many other modern-day Christian theologians flow from, Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was an Italian Dominican friar and priest in the 13th century, and though some of his propositions were condemned as heretical by the Catholic Church during his lifetime, something the Catholic Church has a bad history with doing, just ask Galileo or Aristotle, he is highly recognized in modern times as one of the most influential and important Christian philosophers in history. And we're going to be taking on some of the proofs for God from his work, the Summa Theologica. And it's going to be explained to us by Father James Brent from the Thomistic Institute. I can already imagine that we're going to have significant disagreements, James and I, on the basic language of the discussion, because we're going to disagree on what constitutes proof. Because incredulous insistence that there must be a God because look at the trees, or I feel it in my soul, or because the Bible tells me so, are not even in the ballpark of what should be considered proof. And it's rare to encounter an apologist who doesn't trot out some version of those arguments at some point. But who knows, maybe a 750 years dead friar came up with the rock-solid evidence that, for some reason, just hasn't made the rounds to all people yet in order to convince them of the existence of the Almighty. Well, you never know, right? So let's start breaking down Aquinas. What have you got for us, Father James?
But one of the greatest questions of all times is whether God exists. And Thomas takes the question head-on with his famous 5 ways or 5 proofs for the existence of God. In this episode, we will give a brief sketch of the 5 ways. But let us first ask how human beings can know the existence of God.
We can't. We done here? Good night, everybody. What? Oh, there's more? It can never be that easy, can it?
One way to know God's existence is by taking it on faith from what the Bible says.
Faith is not a way to know anything. If you know something, you don't need faith. Faith is a part of believing in something. If my buddy tells me he has a red marble in his pocket and I trust him to be telling me the truth, I believe that he has a red marble in his pocket. I have faith in him and his honesty to be telling me the truth. But I don't know that he has a red marble in his pocket. Not unless I see it for myself. Then I no longer believe it, I know it. Less the possibility that my senses are wrong or that I'm hallucinating, etc. But the point is, upon seeing the marble, I now have evidence as to its existence. He showed me the marble. That is proof that it exists. Him telling me that there's a marble in his pocket is not proof. It's just a claim. A claim that I can accept as believable. But it's still just a claim. And the Bible is making a claim, well, it's making a lot of claims, some of them demonstrably false. Like that the earth came before the sun, or that the sun and the moon were created at approximately the same time after the earth, or the global flood that never happened, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, or the young earth creationist claim of the earth and the entire universe only being about 6,000 years old, and claiming that that's backed up by passages in the Bible. So if a lot of the claims of the Bible are proven false, then any person with the faintest hint of skepticism would require evidence to believe virtually anything else that the Bible claims. So taking the Bible at its word on faith is not a path to knowing God exists. It is, at best, a path to believing in God in the absence of evidence, and at worst, hand-waving away all the proven falsities of the book and believing it anyway in a real, a broken clock is right twice a day sort of mindset.
But Thomas is well aware that the Bible itself tells us that there's another way to know the existence of God. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, St. Paul tells us that the existence of God is known to everyone, at least in a general and confused sort of way, from the beauty and goodness of the natural world.
We had For the Bible Tells Me So, and now we have Look at the Trees. Only a minute and a half into the video and I'm already 2 for 2 on the Apologist Greatest Hits collection. We aren't even into any of the 5 ways to know God exists yet, but James had to preamble it with these weakest of weak sauce arguments that only work when preaching to the proverbial and literal choir.
And Romans chapter 1, verse 20 is a quick summary of a longer passage in the Book of Wisdom, chapter 13, verses 1 to 9. The 2 passages tell us to expect to find human beings who have never even read the Bible, but know that God exists just from their experience and rational reflection upon the natural world.
But also, reality proves this wrong, as exemplified by the Pitaha people, a tribe of people in the Amazon rainforest of Brazil who, according to Christian missionary Daniel Everett, the Pitaha have no concept of a supreme spirit or God, and they lost interest in Jesus when they discovered that Everett had never seen him. They require evidence based on personal experience for every claim that is made. Imagine that. What we might consider to be a primitive, modern tribe in the middle of the rainforest, based AF.
For both of these reasons, Aquinas taught that human beings have a natural knowledge of God, or to put it another way, that we can know the existence of God by using our natural reason or human intelligence. That is the kind of knowledge we're exploring here, our natural knowledge of God.
And as I, and any other non-believer, will be quick to tell you, I don't have this innate, natural knowledge of God. That's why this argument is so easy to debunk. If you make a claim about all humans, and that claim is not true for just a single human, then that claim is defeated. And there are way more than just one human telling you, and all apologists like you, that we do not have this innate knowledge of God. Your only recourse is to say that we're all either liars or confused about what we do and don't know, neither of which is going to get you very far in any kind of theological discussion with a non-believer. And what's more, no baby is born with knowledge of God either. God, religion, and spirituality of any kind is something that is impressed upon people almost always at a very young age, and they are raised inundated and saturated in it every day. Every child brought up in non-religious households are still surrounded by it constantly as it permeates practically every facet of our culture. Our books, movies, television shows, music, it's all over the place. To claim that everyone is born knowing God naturally, while ensconced in a culture that infuses Abrahamic religious content into practically everything, is like saying that someone raised in Alaska is born knowing that cold can make your fingers numb. No, they figured that out before they even formed their first word. It doesn't mean they were born with the knowledge.
Now, Thomas did not say that our natural knowledge of God was always explicit, clear, or easy to come by. He did not affirm that the existence of God was undeniable. Rather, he thought of the natural knowledge of God as falling on a spectrum of cognitive development. Everyone has a common and confused knowledge of God's existence, but like any other form of knowledge, this common and confused knowledge of God is open to development for those who have the time, interest, and intellectual gifts for developing it.
And yet there are scores of people who were formerly religious, formerly very faithful believers, who truly thought that they knew about God and had this innate knowledge of God's existence, who deconvert, become atheists, and admit that it was all self-delusion, wishful thinking, and youthful indoctrination that caused them to think this way. How is it, James, if we all have this innate knowledge that God exists, confused and unspecific as it may be, that there can be people who spend years studying theology, going into it being fervent believers in the God that they were taught to believe in, but then come out the other side as atheists, and over more and more time become more and more sure that no such being as God exists? You just aren't going to get anywhere with this line of reasoning, James. You're never going to convince a non-believer that God exists by telling us that we actually already know he exists and we're just confused about it. That's insulting. It's reductive. It's a non-starter.
Thomas also realized that it was hard to develop our natural knowledge of God, and many factors stand in the way. Depending on cultural circumstances, people will develop it more or less, but generally not to its fullest perfection. But, he says, a few people, after a long time, and still with some errors mixed in, will develop their natural knowledge of God to such an extent that they can offer philosophically rigorous proofs for the existence of God.
Or another way of looking at it is that after years and years of indoctrination into a faith from an age too young to resist it, and after a lifetime of cultural propaganda reinforcing that imposed belief, many people will properly apply skepticism and logical thought and will recognize the fallacious reasoning at play in most, if not all, of the major religions, especially their own, and will overcome the emotional hardship, the identity crisis one confronts when losing their faith, and the sunk cost fallacy that must be climbed over in order to come out the other side a proponent of reality and rejecter of false ideologies. And by the way, philosophical proof is just another way of saying unsubstantiated claim that I want people to accept anyway.
So how exactly do we know the existence of God? The basic principle behind the 5 ways is that we know the existence of God from our experience of the world of nature and looking for an ultimate explanation of it. We use the same kind of reasoning that we use when we know the existence of any invisible cause from visible effects. For example, if I'm driving down the freeway and see a billowing cloud of smoke coming up from the horizon, I can infer there must be a fire, even if I do not see the fire, even if it's blocked from my view. The fire is invisible, but the smoke it produces is not, and I know the existence of the invisible cause from the visible effect.
All right, so deductive reasoning leading to a belief in God. Now, your approach is sound, James. Seeing any kind of effect and wondering what was the cause does lead one to posit possible competing ideas for what that unseen cause could be, and then determining which candidate explanation has the highest likelihood of being correct. Now, when you use the example of seeing smoke, there are candidate explanations for that are going to be relatively few. Fire produces plumes of smoke, and I suppose there are smoke or fog machines that can produce a plume of smoke, but that's pretty much going to be it. And given the size of the plume of smoke, say visible from miles away, and its location, as in your illustration, of far off the highway, far enough as to not be able to see what's causing it, it's unlikely to be some giant smoke-producing machine out in a cornfield somewhere, but much more likely to be a fire, which happens often and is a relatively mundane occurrence. Now, there were 2 primary candidate explanations there. One, the fire, was simple, mundane, and natural. The other was significantly more complex and required enhancing the cause from a natural, mundane one to a mechanical, complex one that is replete with intentionality. Intentionality to create the giant smoke machine, to place that giant smoke machine where it was, and activate the giant smoke machine for some unexplained reason. Now, as Occam's razor would show, one should not increase beyond reason the number of entities required to explain anything. All things being equal, the simplest solution is often the best one. So, which is the simpler explanation? That a fire started, as is commonplace, and can happen naturally, without intention, and without any entity required to start it? Or should we increase the number of entities to a builder of a giant smoke machine, and someone to place it there, and activate it, and just overcomplicate the entire matter? The simpler explanation, requiring the fewest number of entities, is a fire. And if we extrapolate this line of thinking to the formation of the universe, which is the more likely candidate explanation? That the primordial, hot, dense state that existed at the time of the Big Bang naturally lost stability and expanded into the universe without intentionality, or that a being with all power, all knowledge, unfathomable in its complexity, infinite in its ability, beyond any and all comprehension, a being utterly perfect unto itself, yet desiring to create, thus meaning it was not perfect unto itself, lest it would not have any desires for anything at all, created it all with intentionality. This seems a rather simple proposition. You are arguing for the giant smoke machine. I'm arguing for the fire.
Or similarly, if I wake up one morning with a sore throat, I infer that I have some kind of infection or virus. I do not see the infection or the virus. The cause of the sore throat is invisible, but I know that it's there by reasoning from the experience of the symptoms.
And what would the candidate explanations be for that sore throat? Yes, a virus or infection is one. Also, maybe your throat is sore from an allergic reaction to something you ate. Or maybe you yelled a lot the day before and your throat's sore from overuse. And maybe tiny invisible leprechauns have taken up residence in your trachea and are casting magic pain spells on your throat just to be malicious little shits. Now, which of these candidate explanations is the least likely? And which of these candidate explanations is most in line with the idea of a magical god being speaking the cosmos into existence out of nothing? Frankly, the leprechaun in your throat is even more likely than that.
So it is with our knowledge of God. What we see or experience around us is the natural world. God is invisible. We don't see him. But from what we do see and experience of the natural world, we can infer that something must be behind it all. Something is responsible for the greatness, the beauty, the order of the world.
Good Lord, that's remarkable. And completely wrong.
What?
Everything you said was wrong.
You're saying that I was wrong?
Nothing you said was correct.
Yeah, James, you were on a good, logical, methodical tract of deduction, and then you just jumped off and flew away into Never Never Land. Yes, there had to be a cause for the world being here. Just like that fire off the highway had to have a cause. Just like your sore throat had to have a cause. But where do you get the notion that that cause had to be anything that could be defined as a creator god, utilizing god magic, otherwise called divine power, the power to circumvent the natural laws of the universe, in order to accomplish any goal it wished, with all power and all knowledge and all goodness, creating the universe in all its form and splendor? Where does this idea come from? Why wouldn't the simpler and more likely explanation be that it was a natural occurrence? Just like that fire can naturally occur. Just like that injury to your throat can naturally occur. Sure, there was still a cause for them, but that cause could be entirely natural and with no intentionality behind it. The only rationale for positing this initial cause as a creator god that I've ever heard is the idea that because the universe seems complex, it would require an even more complex cause to be behind it, thus leading to the idea of an infinitely complex God. But that just kicks the can down the road, because then you're stuck with an infinitely complex God being, and wouldn't it require an even more complex super God to be behind its creation? And then the apologist will just fall to special pleading, insisting that God doesn't need to be created, complex though he may be. But then, when the apologist hears that the cosmos doesn't need to be created, complex as it is, they just get this glassy-eyed stare followed by a nuh-uh. All your rationale to this point only gets you to some cause, and nothing at all about the nature of that cause. Everything else that gets you to the idea of God is just presupposition. Why does it have to be a being, an entity? Why does it have to be intelligent? Why does it have to have intentionality? Why does it have to be all-powerful or all-knowing or all-good? Well, because it has to. Y'all, we are 6.5 minutes into this 9-minute video, and James hasn't even gotten to the first of the 5 ways to prove God exists.
It's like I picked the wrong week to quit drinking.
To spell this out, let us give a sketch of each of the 5 ways. In the first way, we start with our experience of the order in the motion or change of things around us in nature. And careful study of what motion and change are leads us to conclude that there must be a first mover or unmoved mover or an ultimate source of change in things.
Again, this only points to some cause, with not even the faintest inkling of the nature of that cause, and no reason to think that it is any kind of willful, intelligent being. Let's go back to that fire that you used as an example. What was the cause of that fire? Let's say it was a lightning strike, an entirely natural, unintentional cause. Well, what was the cause of that lightning? Charged particles in the atmosphere that built up enough to produce an electrical arc between the cloud it originated in and the ground. An entirely natural, unintentional cause. Well, what caused the atmospheric conditions that create lightning? That would be the formation of the planet and the elements on it that coalesced from space through the fundamental force that is gravity that eventually resulted in the formation of this planet and the atmosphere upon it. An entirely natural, unintentional cause. Well, what caused those universal forces like gravity? The formation of the universe from its initial hot, dense state that we know as the Big Bang gave rise to the laws of physics that includes among them the expansion of space-time and the warping of that space-time by all objects with mass, which we call gravity. An entirely natural, unintentional cause. Well then, what caused that Big Bang? And to that, we don't know. But everything in this entire chain has been natural cause after natural cause. Unintelligent, unintentional, unguided, unwilled natural causes. And then the first time we hit a block where we have to say, we don't know what started it all, you just assume a priori that it must be an intelligent, intentional, guiding, willful being. You have to base that on something. And it has to be something better than, because I want it to be God, who loves me and has a plan for me and will take me to heaven when I die. It even has to be something better than, because it doesn't make sense if it's not a God who did it. Because
the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you.
In the second way, we start with our experience of an order of cause and effect in things around us. When we reflect carefully on what causality is, we learn that in order for there to be causes at work, there must be a first cause, or uncaused cause.
How is this point structurally any different from the previous one? Unmoved mover or uncaused cause, it's the same thing, just reworded. You don't get extra points for dressing up the same argument in new clothes and presenting it as something else. Unmoved mover, uncaused cause, uninitiated initiator, unstarted starter, uncreated creator. We can play the synonym game all day, but so far you've only provided 1 point, and a bad one at that. And now a rerun of it. Is the next one going to be the same also?
In the third way, we start by considering the order of contingent beings, things that exist but do not have to exist. When we reflect on things that exist but do not have to exist, we naturally ask, why do they exist? This leads to the conclusion that there must be a source of the very existence of contingent beings, and the source cannot not exist. The source simply is.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
That is always my response to the contingency argument. Frankly, it's just the previous 2 points, again, put into different wording. An uncontingent contingency. The contingency argument sucks. I've dealt with it before, and I've done so fairly recently. In short, it again does not point to any kind of being or intelligence or will. Just that something must have existed that started everything else. There's no reason that uncontingent thing couldn't just be the universe. Or more specifically, the hot, dense state that the universe existed as when the Big Bang began. The contingency argument just asserts that there had to be some brute fact to existence. Something that had to exist from which everything else flowed from. Then it skips right past the idea that the universe itself is that brute fact in order to presuppose that that brute fact of existence had to be God, and Yahweh specifically. At least in Aquinas' view, and Father James here as well. And no, that doesn't follow. You have no reason to skip past the idea of the universe being that contingent thing and insist on it instead being a magic God being. You have to show how you got there, James. You and Aquinas have to show your work. And he never did, and no one that's come in his wake since then has attempted to either.
In the fourth way, we look at how things around us exist in grades of perfection, and the grades of perfection lead to the conclusion that there must be a perfect being, the source of being in everything else.
What the hell did you just say?
Different grades of perfection? What the shit does that even mean? Perfection means flawless. Grades of perfection would mean that there are then levels of perfection. Meaning some perfections could be more perfect than other perfections. I mean, maybe this is the professor in me showing, but if I give 2 students A+ on their papers, it doesn't make sense to then say that one A+ is worth more or is of higher quality than the other A+. Perfection is perfection. Flawless is flawless. So the wording of this one doesn't make a lot of sense. But if I'm parsing down what this likely means, I gather that you're saying that because in any criteria for comparison, there are going to be those who are better than others, closer to perfection in that criteria, then there has to be an ultimate being who maximizes perfection in all criteria. Like some runners are faster than others, so there must be a perfect ultimate speed runner. Some are stronger than others, so there must be a being with ultimate strength, and ultimate knowledge, and ultimate power, etc. This argument doesn't make logical sense. There's no reason why, just because some have superior skills in certain areas, that there then must be a being with ultimate perfection in those and all areas. There's a fastest runner. It's Noah Lyles. He sprinted 100 meters in 9.83 seconds. And that is nowhere near perfect, ultimate speed. But maybe that's just the fastest there is. Well, in humans anyway, fastest animal land running speed is, of course, the cheetah, capable of going from 0 to 60 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds. But that again is nowhere near perfect speed. And maybe, if evolution selects for land speed, there may one day be land animals that can run significantly faster than that. But when that happens, that may just be the fastest running being to exist. And even if they can run 500 miles per hour, that's still nowhere near perfect speed. Same with strength, same with knowledge, same with anything. There's no reason why the current strongest, smartest, most powerful, physical, biological creature, considered to be the highest on any of those metrics, but still nowhere near perfection, is just the best that there is where those criteria are concerned. There's no reason to assume that there's a singular being with absolute perfection in every area simultaneously, or even in any specific area at all. There's no reason to believe that any being has achieved any measure of perfection, or even that attaining perfection, where any sense of improvement is no longer possible, is even a possible plateau to reach in the first place.
And finally, in the fifth way, we find in nature that things without intelligence act for the sake of ends. Honeybees, work to produce honey even though they do not have intelligence, properly speaking. Things without intelligence cannot work for the sake of an end unless a higher intelligence is directing them.
What is intelligence? Intelligence is defined as the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. And virtually all animals do this to some degree. There are no animals, no matter how seemingly automatic their behavior seems to be, that does not acquire knowledge and skills throughout the course of their lives, learning how to serve their drives and instincts and desires more efficiently. Even honeybees, which you offered as an example. As honeybees forage for nectar and pollen, they learn a lot of information about the flowers they visit, such as their smells, colors, and locations. Some bees become extremely focused on information associated with food, ignoring any new information, similar to selective attention in humans. Conversely, other bees exhibit a learning behavior marked by curiosity. They're interested in learning about new food sources, not just familiar ones. Also, the honeybee is not born knowing how to make honey. The younger bees are taught by the more experienced ones. Now sure, they may not learn to the degree that you or I do. They may not be able to learn how to rebuild a carburetor or how to play a concerto that would bring tears to your eyes. But then again, neither can I. But I can learn enough about how animal cognition works to know what all animals do vis-a-vis information processing, and learning qualifies as intelligence, even at the most basic level. Though we may all be born with certain instincts, those are functions of biology by way of evolution. And those instincts don't take us very far. Our instinct to feed would be useless if we didn't have the capacity to learn what is good to eat and what is not good to eat, or where or how to get that food. No different from insects as it is for us. So, no, there doesn't need to be some magical guiding force directing the bees or the birds or the lions and tigers and bears.
Oh my!
This leads us to conclude that there must be a supreme mind or intelligence behind it all.
No, it doesn't. Absolutely none of this points to any kind of mind, will, or intentionality. Frankly, pretty much all of these proofs were non sequiturs. That's when the conclusion does not follow from the premises. In more informal reasoning, it can be when what is presented as evidence or reason is irrelevant or adds very little support to the conclusion. Your conclusion is God, omnipotent, omniscient creator of the universe, with will, intention, and intelligence. Unmoved mover does not point to any kind of a being. Thus, it's a non sequitur. Uncaused cause does not point to any kind of a being. Thus, non sequitur. Uncontingent contingency does not point to any kind of a being. Thus, non sequitur. Some people are better than others in certain ways, so there must be an ultimate perfect being. That conclusion does not follow from the premise at all. Thus, non sequitur. And you were just wrong about less intelligent animals having absolutely no intelligence at all, so your claim that that would require a god to be directing and controlling them is also flawed. That one might not have been a non sequitur per se, but it was a false premise to begin with. And all of this really sounds like someone presupposing God and then looking for reasons to back up that presupposition. And when people do that, when people deeply want to believe in something, they generally don't tend to put any such reasoning through rigorous scrutiny to see if it holds water. If it looks good on the surface, they jump on it and go, "Ha-ha! Look right here, proof positive of my position," not realizing that that proof leaks like a sieve. So, to summarize, what did we have here? Well, we didn't have 5 proofs. I'll be generous and say that we had 3, because the first 3 were all the same thing. Unmoved mover, uncaused cause, and uncontingent contingency are all the exact same thing. Trying to make it seem like you have more reasoning than you do by rerunning the same argument multiple times is not going to fly here. Then there's the notion that there has to be an ultimate perfect being because there are degrees of perfection, which was a terrible way to word it. It would be better to say there are degrees of ability, so therefore there must be a singular being of perfection in all abilities. And this simply does not follow. There's no reason to conclude such a being just because some people are smarter than others or some animals are stronger than others. There could just be someone who is the best in one area, and that being is nowhere near perfect in that area. And no more perfect beings exist. And finally, some creatures aren't smart enough to do anything unless they're being magically controlled by God, like a kid driving a remote control car. But that's based on the incorrect assumption that just because most animals aren't as smart as humans, then that means they have no intelligence or ability to learn at all, which simply isn't true and displays Homo sapien-centric narcissism. If it ain't human intelligence, it's not intelligence at all. I mean, we could forgive Aquinas for a lot of these reasonings. He was from the 13th century, after all, and he didn't know much about Big Bang cosmology as the beginning of the current presentation of our universe, and he didn't know much about biology and cognition of animals, but we do know these things now. So there's no excuse for modern theologians to be repeating this tripe. Any more so than the Catholic Church had reason to continue denying that the sun is the center of our solar system clear through 1758, long after heliocentrism's acceptance basically everywhere else. It's just stubbornly clinging to the reasoning from religious antiquity because you simply don't like the idea that they might have been wrong. Because if Aquinas was wrong about all of that, what else might he, and the Church, and the wider faith have been wrong about? Scary thought, huh, James? So that is where we'll leave things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Until next time, I'm Professor Plink reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.